Your mind is under attack every single day. Distractions, noise, stress, and endless demands are tearing your focus apart. But what if I told you that mental strength isn't something you're born with? It's something you build. In the next hour, I'm going to show you the exact daily habits, systems, and mindset shifts that will train your brain to focus deeper, resist distractions, and stay unshakable no matter what life throws at you. If you follow this blueprint, your mind will stop wandering, your clarity will skyrocket, and you will finally master the most valuable skill in life: unbreakable attention. Chapter 1. Stop chasing motivation and start building habits. You have a choice. You can wait for motivation, or you can build habits. That is the decision. Motivation is fleeting. It arrives uninvited. It disappears without notice. It cannot be commanded. It cannot be relied upon. You may feel motivated today. You may feel motivated tomorrow, but the day after it may be gone. Your results will disappear with it. That is why motivation is a poor foundation. Habits are permanent. Habits do not ask for permission. Habits do not disappear. They are built. They are reinforced. They are automatic. That is the key. Your brain does not distinguish between willpower and repetition. Every repeated action rewires your neural pathways. Every skipped action weakens your mind. You're training your mind. You're not entertaining it. You're not motivating it. You're training it. Stop thinking of your actions as optional. Show up consistently. That is how elite performers operate. They do not wait to feel like doing the work. They build a structure that forces action. They set up systems. They remove choice. That is the key. You do not need their permission. You do not need approval. You do not need a cheerleader. You need discipline. You need repetition. You need a system that executes, even when your brain protests. Start small. Start with micro habits. One action, one repetition, one decision repeated daily. The size of the habit is not important. Its consistency is. You do not need a dramatic transformation overnight. You need a sequence of repeated behaviors. The cumulative effect compounds over time. A single micro habit, executed daily, becomes unstoppable. That is the system. That is the rule. Here is an example. Consider an elite athlete. They do not rely on inspiration to train. They follow a precise routine. They lift weights at the same time. They run the same distance. They stretch at the same time. No debate. No negotiation. The action repeats. Over months. Over years. That repetition rewires the mind. It rewires the body. It creates automatic strength. Your brain begins to expect the behavior. It no longer requires motivation. It no longer negotiates. That is the power of habits. That is why you must stop chasing motivation. You will feel resistance. That is normal. Resistance is your mind fighting the new structure. Resistance is your mind clinging to old pathways. Resistance is not a reason to quit. Resistance is a reason to persist. That is the test. The stronger the resistance, the greater the opportunity to reinforce the habit. Each time you perform the action despite resistance, you're teaching your brain a new rule. I do it because I show up, not because I feel like it. Repeat it. Memorize it. Live it. That is the mantra. That is the foundation. Now, define your micro habits. Identify one action that requires discipline but is manageable. It can be as simple as 5 push-ups, 10 minutes of reading, a single page of journaling, or a 60-second review of your goals. Make it non-negotiable. Make it daily. Schedule it. Anchor it to an existing habit. For example, after brushing your teeth, write one sentence in your journal. After drinking your morning coffee, plan your top 3 tasks for the day. Anchor your habits. Connect them to something automatic. That is the system. That is the leverage. Track your habits. Record your progress. Not for validation. Not for praise. For feedback. for evidence. The system requires accountability. You will begin to see streaks. You will see gaps. The gaps teach you. The streaks reinforce you. Every completed habit strengthens the neural pathway. Every missed habit weakens it. You have a choice. You will either reinforce the habit or abandon it. That is the rule. Do not confuse action with intensity. You do not need to spend hours. You need repetition. You do not need a perfect outcome. You need consistent input. One repeated action builds momentum. That momentum compounds. The result is automatic discipline, automatic focus, automatic strength. The system executes even when you do not. That is the distinction between motivation and habit. Motivation is temporary. Habit is permanent. That is the lesson. Now, consider your environment. Your surroundings dictate your ability to maintain habits. Remove friction. Reduce excuses. Place reminders in visible locations. Make the desired behavior easier than the undesired alternative. For example, leave your workout clothes next to your bed. Place your journal on your desk. Remove your phone from your immediate workspace. Reduce choice. Create structure. That is the system. That is how habits become automatic. Reflect on the power of repetition. One habit performed once is meaningless. One habit performed daily rewires your brain. One habit repeated for 30 days becomes a fixed neural pathway. One habit repeated for years becomes identity. That is the ultimate leverage. Habits define who you are, not inspiration, not emotion, not desire. Habits, that is the truth. This is not optional. If you wait for motivation, you will fail. If you rely on feelings, you will fail. If you do not enforce structure, you will fail. You have a choice. The choice is simple. Build habits or remain scattered. Build habits or remain reactive. Build habits or remain weak. That is the rule. That is the path. You do not get a vote. You do not negotiate with your mind. You act. You show up. You repeat. You execute. You reinforce. You win. Finish this chapter by selecting your first micro-habit. Write it down. Schedule it. Execute it daily. Remove choice. Remove debate. Remove reliance on motivation. Repeat the habit. Strengthen the neural pathway. Chapter 2. Silence your mind. Strengthen your focus. You have a choice. You can let your mind run wild, or you can control it. That is the decision. Every thought that enters your mind demands energy. Every distraction weakens your attention. Every unchecked impulse steals clarity. That is the cost of noise. The mind cannot focus when it is crowded. The mind cannot act decisively when it is fragmented. That is the truth. You must silence it. That is the key. The quieter your mind, the sharper your focus. Repeat it. Memorize it. Live it. Silence is not empty. Silence is control. Silence is a tool. It is a system you implement, not a feeling you wait to achieve. Most people think they must act constantly to succeed. They fill their schedules. They scroll endlessly. They talk without pause. They mistake motion for progress. That is a flaw. It is not about motion. It is about discipline. It is about stillness. It is about focus. You have a choice. Move constantly and scatter energy, or pause deliberately and concentrate power. That is the rule. Start with intentional silence. Begin with 5 minutes a day. Sit quietly. No phone. No music. No external input. Do not attempt to control your thoughts. Do not judge them. Observe them. Notice how often your mind wanders. Notice how restless it is. That is normal. That is expected. That is why you practice. 5 minutes. Not 10. Not 30. 5. Daily. That is the system. That is the discipline. Next, integrate single-task meditation. Choose one simple action. Focus entirely on it. It can be breathing. It can be a single word. It can be the sensation of your body. Every time your mind wanders, return to the focus point. Count silently. Observe without judgment. Return, return, return. The mind will resist. The mind will protest. That is the signal you are strengthening focus. That is the exercise. That is the system. Repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. That is how the neural pathways for attention are built. Digital distractions are the enemy of mental clarity. You have a choice. You can allow constant notifications. You can allow endless scrolling. Or you can enforce boundaries. That is the system. Choose one block of time each day. Turn off notifications. Close all apps. Silence your phone. Focus on a single task for 15 to 30 minutes. Do not interrupt. Do not negotiate. Do not rationalize. This is a training session. Treat it as non-negotiable. Treat it as a rule. That is the power of a digital detox. That is how focus is strengthened. Understand the principle. Noise in the mind is cumulative. Small distractions multiply. They erode discipline. They destroy clarity. Each interruption rewires your brain towards scattered attention. That is the cost of chaos. Each moment of deliberate silence rewires the brain toward clarity. That is the benefit of discipline. You have a choice. Reinforce distraction or reinforce focus. That is the key. That is the system. That is the rule. Observe. Quieting the mind is not passive. It is active training. It requires vigilance. It requires patience. Every time you sit in silence, you strengthen the circuits that control attention. Every time you resist the urge to switch tasks, you reinforce control. Every time you pause before reacting, you reclaim energy. That is the principle. That is the system. That is the foundation of mental strength. Practice reflection. At the end of each day, spend 2 to 5 minutes reviewing actions, decisions, and distractions. Write them down. Analyze them. Identify moments when your mind was scattered. Identify moments when your focus was intact. Recognize patterns. That is feedback. That is data. That is the system. Without reflection, silence loses its power. With reflection, it becomes a weapon. Integrate micro pauses throughout your day. Before responding to a message, take a breath. Before switching tasks, pause for 5 seconds. Before making a decision, stop and reflect. These pauses create space for clarity. They reduce impulsivity. They increase control. Repetition builds strength. Pauses are not optional. They are not luxury. They are training. That is the rule. That is the system. The quieter your mind, the sharper your focus. Repeat it. Always. Design your environment to reinforce silence. Close unnecessary tabs. Keep your workspace minimal. Remove visual clutter. Remove auditory clutter. Limit interruptions. Create a zone where the brain is conditioned to focus. That is not preference. That is strategy. That is the system. That is how elite performers operate. They do not rely on self-control alone. They structure their environment. They engineer focus. You must do the same. That is the key. Reinforce the mantra. Every time you feel scattered, repeat silently. The quieter my mind, the sharper my focus. Use it when you sit, when you walk, when you work, when you pause. Repeat it until the principle is embedded. Repeat it until it is automatic. Repeat it until your mind no longer resists. This repetition builds discipline. It builds clarity. It builds mental strength. That is the rule. That is the system. Do not mistake comfort for progress. Silence is uncomfortable at first. The mind rebels against stillness. The urge to move, to check, to speak, to distract is strong. That is expected. That is normal. That is the training. You persist despite discomfort. You persist despite distraction. You persist despite resistance. That is how mental clarity is forged. That is how focus becomes unshakable. That is how strength is built. End each session deliberately. Do not leave silence halfway. Do not let the mind wander without correction. Close the session intentionally. Reflect briefly. Breathe. Return to action. Apply the calm, controlled energy you trained. That is the transition. That is the bridge from stillness to performance. That is how you carry focus from practice to reality. You have a choice. Allow your mind to run untrained or build circuits of clarity. Allow distraction to dominate or enforce stillness and attention. That is the system. That is the rule. That is the principle. The quieter your mind, the sharper your focus. Repeat it. Reinforce it. Live it. Practice it daily. Track it. Anchor it. Make it automatic. That is how mental strength is cultivated. That is how discipline becomes your identity. Next, you will combine this clarity with action. You will take the focused energy you create in silence and channel it into a single, deliberate task. You will learn to eliminate multitasking. You will learn to apply the systems you built in micro habits to sustained attention. That is the next step. That is inevitable. That is the progression from silence to mastery. Chapter 3. Single task like a master. You have a choice. You can scatter your attention, or you can focus it. That is the decision. Multitasking is a lie. It masquerades as productivity. It feels like motion. It feels like progress. It does not produce results. It dilutes energy. It fractures the mind. It reduces clarity. It destroys mental strength. That is the truth. One task, one mind, full attention. Repeat it. Internalize it. Live it. That is the principle. Consider the brain like a lens. Attention is the light. Multitasking spreads the light over multiple points. Each point is dim. Each point loses intensity. No task receives full energy. The result is weak, scattered, ineffective. Now focus the lens. Concentrate the light on a single point. It burns. It creates power. It produces results. One task, one mind, full attention. That is the system. That is the rule. That is the method of high performers. High achievers do not rely on talent alone. They rely on focus. They structure their days to enforce it. They design routines that make distraction impossible. A writer may schedule a 3-hour block to write one chapter. A programmer may dedicate 2 hours to debug a single problem. A surgeon may focus entirely on one procedure without interruption. In each case, the intensity of attention creates exponential results. 1 hour of deep focus is worth 3 hours of scattered effort. That is the advantage. That is the leverage. That is the principle. Start by identifying your most important task each day. One task, not 3, not 5. 1. This is not optional. This is not a suggestion. Write it down. Schedule it. Protect it. Allocate an uninterrupted block of time. Remove distractions. Silence your phone. Close unrelated tabs. Inform colleagues or family if needed. The task must have priority. That is the system. That is the rule. That is the path to mastery. Next, implement a deep work block. Set a timer. Start small. 30 minutes is sufficient. During this time, all attention is dedicated to the task. No breaks. No side thoughts. No social media. No email. No conversation. One task. One mind. Full attention. Observe the difference. Your mind will resist. It will want to wander. That is normal. That is expected. That is the training. Return your attention immediately. Return, return, return. That is how focus is strengthened. That is how excellence is built. Repetition is the key. Do not attempt deep work once and expect mastery. Schedule it daily. Consistency matters more than intensity. Build a habit of focus blocks. Each session compounds. Each repetition strengthens the neural pathways of attention. Multitasking is undone by one scattered hour. Focus is reinforced by every single session of deep attention. That is the principle. That is the rule. That is the system. One task, one mind, full attention. Repeat it. Notice the difference in output. When attention is scattered, work feels endless. Progress is slow. Completion is rare. When attention is concentrated, results multiply. Decisions are clearer. Quality increases. Speed improves. Satisfaction rises. The task completes. Momentum builds. That is the exponential benefit of single tasking. That is the principle of deep focus. That is the system of mastery. Anchor single tasking to micro habits. Begin each day with one deliberate task, executed without interruption. Progress to longer sessions. End the day with reflection on the task completed. Did you maintain focus? Did you return attention when it wandered? Did you protect the block? Note the results. Adjust the environment as needed. Strengthen the habit. That is the system. That is the rule. That is how mental strength compounds. Your environment is critical. Single tasking fails in a chaotic space. Remove clutter. Reduce visual noise. Eliminate interruptions. Place only what is necessary for the task at hand. A clean desk. A single monitor. Minimal distractions. That is the system. That is the leverage. That is the difference between shallow work and mastery. One task, one mind, full attention. Repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. Implement mental cues. Before starting, take a breath. Close your eyes briefly. Visualize completion. Affirm one task, one mind, full attention. Let this be the ritual. Each time you sit to work, perform the cue. It signals your brain. It reinforces the system. It conditions attention. Habits of focus are built in repetition, not intention alone. That is the rule. That is the method. That is the principle. Beware the illusion of busyness. A full calendar is not proof of progress. Constant activity is not strength. Scattered action is weakness. Multitasking is a trap. It feels productive. It is empty. Focused effort is what creates results. One task, one mind, full attention. That is how mastery occurs. That is how mental strength grows. That is the system. That is the rule. Pause and reflect. Each distraction resisted strengthens your neural pathways. Each completed deep work block reinforces discipline. Each repeated habit compounds mental strength. That is why elite performers schedule, protect, and defend single tasking. That is why you must do the same. That is your responsibility. That is your choice. You do not need approval. You do not need permission. You act. You repeat. You strengthen. One task, one mind, full attention. Track your blocks. Measure results. Identify when attention falters. Adjust the environment. Adjust the schedule. Enforce boundaries. Protect the block. Reinforce the system. Let every session become evidence. Evidence of your discipline. Evidence of your focus. Evidence of your mental strength. That is the principle. That is the rule. That is the method. This is not optional. Single tasking is non-negotiable. Multitasking weakens. Multitasking destroys. Multitasking fractures attention. Single tasking builds power. Single tasking creates clarity. Single tasking strengthens the mind. One task, one mind, full attention. Repeat it, repeat it, repeat it. That is the truth. That is the principle. That is the system. End each session deliberately. Close the block intentionally. Reflect briefly. Breathe. Recognize accomplishment. Reinforce the system. Carry the focused energy into the next action. Apply the same principle across tasks. Extend single tasking from work to decisions, conversations, and study. The principle remains. One task, One mind, full attention. That is the path. That is the system. That is the rule. Next, you will combine single tasking with habit systems and mental pauses. You will learn how to sustain attention across multiple hours and complex projects. You will learn to resist distraction in real time. You will integrate micro pauses and deep work into a cohesive mental training system. That is the next step. That is the progression. That is inevitable. Chapter 4. The system is your superpower. You have a choice. You can chase vague goals, or you can build systems. That is the decision. Goals are fragile. Goals are aspirational. They depend on willpower. Willpower is limited. Willpower fades. Goals alone will fail. Systems are permanent. Systems do not wait for motivation. Systems do not debate. Systems enforce action. That is the principle. A system wins where willpower fails. Repeat it. Memorize it. Live it. That is the truth. Stop thinking in terms of outcomes alone. Outcomes are results. They are delayed. They are uncertain. Systems are processes. They are predictable. They are repeatable. They produce results automatically. They remove reliance on fleeting energy, emotion, or luck. That is the key. If you structure your life with systems, results follow. If you rely on willpower alone, failure is inevitable. You have a choice. Build systems, or remain reactive. That is the rule. Start with your morning. Morning routines are foundational systems. They set the tone. They determine energy, focus, and clarity. Choose specific, non-negotiable actions. Wake at the same time daily. Hydrate. Exercise. Journal. Plan the top 3 tasks. Each step reinforces structure. Each step automates discipline. Each step removes decision fatigue. That is the system. That is leverage. That is how winners operate. A system wins where willpower fails. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Next, implement time blocking. Schedule your day in explicit blocks for specific tasks. 1 task per block. 1 focus per block. Do not multitask. Do not compromise. Protect the time. Label the block clearly. Deep work, email, reading, reflection. Defend it. Treat it as non-negotiable. Time blocking is not optional. It is a system. It is a rule. It automates focus. It creates momentum. It removes reliance on fluctuating energy. That is the principle. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Simplify decisions. Use the 2-minute rule. If a task takes less than 2 minutes, do it immediately. Decisions accumulate mental weight. Each deferred choice taxes focus. Each delayed action adds noise to the mind. Eliminate small decisions instantly. Reduce mental clutter. Reduce friction. Reduce wasted energy. That is the system. That is the leverage. That is how your mind is freed for higher value action. A system wins where willpower fails. Repeat it. Internalize it. Live it. Combine systems. Micro habits from Chapter 1. Silence from Chapter 2. Single tasking from Chapter 3. Layer them together. Morning routine triggers micro habits. Deep work blocks follow. Pauses maintain clarity. Digital detox protects focus. One system feeds the next. One system reinforces the other. The effect compounds. Mental strength becomes automatic. That is the power of a system. That is the advantage of structure. That is the foundation of mastery. Structure the environment. Systems fail in chaotic spaces. Organize your workspace. Limit distractions. Use visual cues for tasks. Remove unnecessary tools. Place only what is needed for the task. That is not preference. That is strategy. That is a system enforcing behavior automatically. Your environment is a silent partner in your mental discipline. A system wins where willpower fails. Repeat it. Reinforce it. Follow it. Observe the pattern of elite performers. They do not rely on willpower alone. They design rituals, morning routines, focused work sessions, anchored micro-habits, structured environment, systems that produce results independent of mood or energy. They do not debate. They do not wait. They execute. That is the lesson. That is the model. That is your blueprint. Build the system. Follow the system. Trust the system. A system wins where willpower fails. Reflection is part of the system. Daily review is non-negotiable. At the end of the day, evaluate your blocks. Did the system execute? Did focus persist? Did distractions occur? Adjust only if the system fails. Do not abandon the system because of discomfort. Refine, strengthen, reinforce. Reflection is feedback. Feedback strengthens repetition. Repetition strengthens structure. Structure automates discipline. That is the system. That is leverage. That is the rule. Apply systems to every area. Sleep, exercise, nutrition, decision-making, learning, work. Each domain benefits from repeatable processes. Layer systems strategically. Avoid reliance on spontaneous energy. Avoid reliance on fleeting motivation. Avoid reliance on willpower. Structure produces action automatically. Action produces results. Results reinforce the system. That is how mental strength compounds. That is how performance becomes automatic. That is the principle. A system wins where willpower fails. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Resist the temptation to chase new goals before the system functions. Systems require consistency. Systems require patience. Systems require repetition. One flawed system executed consistently produces more than 10 perfect goals executed sporadically. That is reality. That is the rule. That is unavoidable. You have a choice. Build one system. Master it. Then add another. Layer by layer, strength compounds. That is the path. That is leverage. That is mastery. Anchor mental cues to systems. Start each block with a ritual. Affirm. A system wins where willpower fails. Observe the principle. Internalize it. Execute the process. Reinforce discipline. Each repetition embeds the structure. Each block strengthens clarity. Each day compounds focus. That is the power of systems. That is the advantage of structure. That is the foundation of permanent mental strength. Do not confuse action with structure. Busy work is not a system. Sporadic effort is not a system. Repetition is a system. Discipline is a system. Predictable, repeatable, non-negotiable actions are a system. That is the truth. That is the principle. That is the leverage. A system wins where willpower fails. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. In the day, deliberately. Evaluate. Adjust. Reinforce. Schedule the next morning. Protect the blocks. Maintain the cues. Observe the micro-habits. Preserve the single-tasking principle. Apply silence and mental pauses. Layer systems. Execute without debate. Execute without emotion. Execute without reliance on fleeting motivation. That is the rule. That is the principle. That is the system. Next, you will learn to fight distractions actively. You will build protective routines. You will train the mind to resist external noise and internal impulses. You will extend systems beyond structure to defense. That is the progression. That is inevitable. That is mastery. Chapter 5. Fight distractions like a warrior. You have a choice. You can surrender your attention, or you can defend it. That is the decision. Every distraction is a thief. Every interruption steals energy. Every unchecked notification fractures focus. Every social media scroll diminishes clarity. Every unnecessary decision drains willpower. That is reality. You cannot fight what you cannot see. You must identify the enemy. You must eliminate it. That is the rule. Distraction is defeat. Focus is victory. Repeat it. Internalize it. Live it. Identify the first thieves. Notifications. Alerts. Pings. Every phone buzz demands attention. Every email notification fragments your mind. Every pop-up draws energy away from important work. That is the cost. Social media is another thief. It masquerades as connection. It masquerades as progress. It is designed to steal your focus. It rewards dopamine, not results. That is the danger. Constant decision-making is the final thief we will address. Every choice you defer, every minor decision you agonize over, consumes mental bandwidth. Your brain tires before the task begins. That is the reality. You have a choice. Fight these thieves, or surrender your mind. That is the rule. Begin with phone blackouts. Silence notifications. Disable alerts. Use Do Not Disturb modes. Schedule blocks where the phone is out of reach. If necessary, place it in another room. You do not need constant access. You do not need permission to ignore them. Your attention is your most valuable resource. Protect it. That is the system. That is leverage. That is how warriors defend focus. Distraction is defeat. Focus is victory. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Next, implement focused work sprints. Set a timer. Choose one task. Dedicate 30 to 90 minutes exclusively to that task. No email. No calls. No messages. No social media. If your mind wanders, return immediately. Observe. Correct. Return. Each completed sprint strengthens neural pathways of attention. Each resisted impulse builds discipline. That is the system. That is the method. That is how mental strength is trained. Distraction is defeat. Focus is victory. Repeat it. Internalize it. Apply it. Environmental engineering is critical. Your surroundings can amplify focus or amplify distraction. Design a workspace that enforces attention automatically. Remove clutter. Remove unnecessary devices. Keep only what is required for the task. Limit noise. Use headphones if needed. Position screens to reduce temptation. Place visual reminders of the task. This is not preference. This is strategy. This is non-negotiable. That is how focus is reinforced. Distraction is defeat. Focus is victory. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Layer systems. Combine micro-habits, single-tasking, silence, and now distraction defense. Morning routines anchor the day. Deep work blocks enforce focus. Pauses protect clarity. Environmental engineering removes friction. Phone blackouts enforce boundaries. Digital detoxes remove temptation. The system executes automatically. The mind is trained. Attention becomes predictable. Results follow. That is leverage. That is mastery. That is how mental strength compounds. Distraction is defeat. Focus is victory. Repeat it. Observe your triggers. When does distraction strike? Is it fatigue, boredom, external interruptions, internal impulses? Recognize patterns. Track interruptions. Identify weak points in your schedule. Reinforce defenses where needed. Adjust environment. Adjust timing. Adjust rituals. Refine systems. Repetition creates strength. Observation informs action. Action reinforces control. That is the system. That is leverage. That is the rule. Distraction is defeat. Focus is victory. Use mental cues to strengthen resistance. Before engaging with a task, repeat silently. Distraction is defeat. Focus is victory. Repeat it while sitting, walking, or preparing for work. Let condition the mind. Let reinforce the principle. Let it create an automatic response to temptation. Each repetition strengthens neural pathways. Each repetition embeds discipline. That is how warriors fight distractions. That is how focus becomes inevitable. That is how mental strength grows. Micro pauses reinforce control. When a notification appears, pause. Take a breath. Decide intentionally whether to engage. Do not react automatically. Observe the impulse. Decide consciously. Return attention to the task. Each pause is training. Each pause reinforces self-mastery. Each pause compounds strength. That is the system. That is the method. That is the rule. Distraction is defeat. Focus is victory. Repeat it. Live it. Execute it. Reinforce with schedule discipline. Protect time blocks. Do not negotiate interruptions. Do not rationalize exceptions. One interrupted block weakens the system. One defended block strengthens it. Accumulated protected blocks produce mastery. That is the principle. That is the leverage. That is unavoidable. You have a choice. Defend your blocks. Protect your time. Enforce the system. Distraction is defeat. Focus is victory. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Anchor routines to energy levels. Identify peak focus periods. Schedule high-value tasks during these periods. Low-value or repetitive tasks are assigned to low-energy windows. Align work with natural rhythms. Reduce the opportunity for distraction. That is strategy. That is discipline. That is unavoidable. A system wins where willpower fails. Distraction is defeat. Focus is victory. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Do not mistake resistance for inability. You will feel tempted. You will want to check the phone. You will want to scroll. You will want to escape focus. That is normal. That is expected. That is the training. Persist. Correct. Reinforce. Each act of resistance strengthens neural pathways. Each act of defense reinforces discipline. That is how mental strength compounds. That is how warriors operate. That is unavoidable. Distraction is defeat. Focus is victory. Repeat it. Internalize it. Live it. Daily review is non-negotiable. At the end of the day, reflect on interruptions. Evaluate focus blocks. Analyze weaknesses. Adjust systems. Re-anchor habits. Reinforce environmental controls. Track progress. Celebrate consistency. Correct lapses immediately. Do not wait. Do not rationalize. Discipline is immediate. Attention is defended. That is the system. That is leverage. That is the rule. Distraction is defeat. Focus is victory. Repeat it. End every session deliberately. Close the work block. Reflect briefly. Breathe. Reaffirm. Distraction is defeat. Focus is victory. Carry this principle into the next task. Carry it into conversations. Carry it into decision-making. Chapter 6. Embrace the power of micro-decisions. You have a choice. You can waste your energy on small decisions, or you can conserve it for what matters. That is the decision. Every choice consumes mental bandwidth. Every deferred decision drains clarity. Every unnecessary option fragments focus. That is reality. You cannot master high-value work while squandering energy on trivial matters. That is why micro-decisions matter. That is why elite performers simplify relentlessly. Master the small, dominate the big. Repeat it. Internalize it. Live it. That is the principle. Understand the cost. Imagine 10 minor decisions each morning. What to wear, what to eat, which email to answer first, which meeting to prioritize. Each consumes focus. Each depletes energy. By midday, your mental reserve is lower. By evening, attention is scattered. Energy is fragmented. Decisions that require strategy suffer. That is the consequence of unmanaged micro-decisions. That is the flaw. It is not about laziness. It is about discipline. It is about structure. Master the small, dominate the big. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. The solution is systemization. Reduce trivial choices. Automate routines. Pre-plan actions. Top CEOs wear the same outfit daily. They eat the same breakfast. They schedule recurring meetings at fixed times. Every trivial choice is eliminated. Mental bandwidth is freed. Focus is preserved. Energy is directed toward high-value work. That is the system. That is leverage. That is strategy. Master the small, dominate the big. Repeat it. Anchor decisions to rules. If X occurs, then Y follows. For example, if the calendar shows a meeting, prepare in advance. If email is received, sort immediately using a fixed system. If a task takes less than 2 minutes, complete it immediately. Rules reduce hesitation. Rules remove mental friction. Rules conserve energy. Rules create consistency. That is the system. That is automation. That is unavoidable. Master the small, dominate the big. Repeat it. Use batch processing. Group similar decisions together. Answer all emails at scheduled time. Handle all minor communications in a single session. Process routine tasks consecutively. Avoid constant context switching. Context switching is costly. It fragments focus. It drains energy. Batch decisions. Consolidate effort. Strengthen clarity. That is the system. That is leverage. That is the rule. Master the small, dominate the big. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Delegate strategically. Identify tasks that do not require your direct attention. Assign them to capable individuals or automated systems. Reduce unnecessary involvement. Free your mind for high-value action. Top performers do not micromanage trivial matters. They conserve mental energy. They preserve attention for critical decisions. That is strategy. That is discipline. That is non-negotiable. Master the small, dominate the big. Repeat it. Prioritize relentlessly. Identify which choices truly impact results. Not every decision is equal. Not every option deserves energy. Focus on high-leverage decisions. Delegate or automate the rest. This is not avoidance. This is efficiency. This is deliberate allocation of mental resources. That is the system. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Master the small, dominate the big. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Track decisions consciously. At the end of the day, review your choices. Where did you spend energy wisely? Where was energy wasted? Identify patterns. Adjust systems. Reinforce rules. Eliminate unnecessary micro-decisions. Each cycle strengthens focus. Each correction preserves clarity. Each iteration compounds mental strength. That is the system. That is the method. That is mastery. Master the small, dominate the big. Repeat it. Apply simplification to routines. Meals, clothing, email, recurring tasks. Automate, pre-decide, batch. Remove decision friction. Energy is preserved for deep work. Energy is preserved for critical thinking. Energy is preserved for high-value action. That is the principle. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Master the small, dominate the big. Repeat it. Integrate mental pauses. Before any minor decision, pause. Observe the choice. Decide consciously. Avoid reflexive or impulsive action. This strengthens control. This conditions attention. This conserves energy for important tasks. Each pause is training. Each pause reinforces discipline. That is the system. That is unavoidable. Master the small, dominate the big. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Consider a real-world example. A CEO schedules every day with precision. Breakfast, exercise, commute, email, meetings pre-decided. Energy is reserved for strategic decisions, acquisitions, product launches, hiring. No mental bandwidth is wasted on trivial choices. Result: exponential productivity. Result: sustained clarity. Result: unshakable focus. That is the outcome of mastering micro-decisions. That is the principle. That is unavoidable. Master the small, dominate the big. Combine micro-decision management with prior chapters. Micro-habits from Chapter 1. Silence from Chapter 2. Single tasking from Chapter 3. Systems from Chapter 4. Distraction defense from Chapter 5. Layer micro-decision rules on top. Free attention. Preserve clarity. Strengthen focus. Compound mental strength. That is the system. That is leverage. That is mastery. Master the small, dominate the big. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Resist temptation. Your mind will want to engage in minor decisions impulsively. Your mind will resist automation. That is normal. That is expected. That is training. Persist. Reinforce rules. Strengthen systems. Build discipline. Energy is preserved. Attention is protected. Mental strength compounds. That is the principle. That is unavoidable. Master the small, dominate the big. Repeat it. End the day with deliberate reflection. Review energy allocation. Review micro-decisions. Reinforce successful systems. Correct failures. Re-anchor rules. Strengthen automation. Each review strengthens clarity. Each iteration builds mental endurance. That is the system. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Master the small, dominate the big. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Next, you will learn to build resilience through daily challenges. You will train your mind to sustain focus under pressure. You will reinforce discipline through deliberate difficulty. You will integrate attention, systems, and decision control into a mental armor. That is the next step. That is inevitable. That is mastery. Chapter 7. Build resilience through daily challenges. You have a choice. You can avoid difficulty, or you can embrace it. That is the decision. Mental strength does not grow in comfort. It does not grow in ease. It grows in resistance. It grows in challenge. It grows in discomfort. That is the principle. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Repeat it. Internalize it. Live it. That is the truth. Understand the nature of growth. Your mind adapts to what you expose it to. If you avoid discomfort, your mental circuits remain weak. If you face difficulty consistently, your mind strengthens. Each challenge rewires focus, attention, and discipline. Each challenge reinforces resilience. This is not optional. This is not motivational. This is structural. That is the principle. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Start with micro-challenges. Small, deliberate acts that introduce manageable stress. Take a cold shower in the morning. The shock teaches tolerance. The discomfort trains focus. The mind learns to accept difficulty without panic. It is deliberate exposure. It is practice. It is a system. Repeat it daily. That is the first layer of resilience. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Set strict deadlines. Give yourself finite time to complete tasks. Remove wiggle room. Deadlines impose structure. Deadlines force action. Deadlines condition urgency. The mind adapts to pressure. It learns to execute decisively. Each deadline, even small, compounds resilience. That is the system. That is discipline. That is unavoidable. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Repeat it. Incorporate focused reading. Choose difficult material. Engage with ideas that challenge your perspective. Do not skim. Read actively. Reflect on every point. Journal insights immediately. The mind stretches. Concentration strengthens. Comprehension deepens. Mental endurance expands. That is training. That is practice. That is deliberate discomfort. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Use journaling as micro-challenge. Examine your habits, thoughts, and decisions critically. Identify weaknesses. Record small wins. Record failures. Reflect without excuse. Confront reality. Discipline is reinforced. Mental clarity grows. Resilience compounds. That is the system. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Combine challenges strategically. Cold shower, strict deadline, focused reading, journaling. Stack them into a daily ritual. Each element amplifies the next. Each challenge strengthens multiple mental circuits. Energy is conserved for high-value effort because the mind has adapted to discomfort. Attention is sharpened. Focus is automatic. That is the principle. That is leverage. That is the system. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Observe the principle in elite performers. Soldiers, athletes, entrepreneurs, and leaders willingly engage with controlled difficulty. They do not seek comfort. They schedule exposure. Cold, pressure, fatigue, complex problems they endure deliberately. The result is unshakable focus, stamina, and discipline. The same applies to you. Deliberate challenge strengthens the mind. That is the truth. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Anchor resilience to habits. Do not wait for extraordinary conditions to practice difficulty. Micro-challenges daily. They compound. They reinforce systems. They strengthen circuits of mental toughness. The body and mind learn to accept resistance as normal. They learn to act under pressure. They learn to execute despite discomfort. That is the principle. That is unavoidable. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Repeat it. Environment reinforces challenge. Arrange conditions that encourage discomfort intentionally. Lower the thermostat. Reduce convenience. Introduce minor friction. Limit distractions deliberately. These small stressors condition attention and discipline. Each exposure trains tolerance. Each adaptation strengthens resilience. That is the system. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Pause and reflect during challenges. Cold shower. Notice breath. Deadline. Notice pressure. Reading. Notice mental fatigue. Journaling. Notice self-honesty. Observation reinforces learning. Observation compounds strength. Do not bypass reflection. It converts experience into skill. That is the principle. That is the system. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Resist avoidance instinct. The mind will seek ease. The body will resist discomfort. That is expected. That is normal. That is the training signal. Persist anyway. Correct immediately. Reinforce exposure. Each repetition builds mental circuits. Each repetition strengthens discipline. Each repetition compounds resilience. That is the system. That is unavoidable. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Track performance deliberately. Daily micro-challenges are data. Record completion. Record reactions. Record discomfort level. Adjust intensity gradually. Ensure progression. Avoid stagnation. This is not optional. This is feedback. Feedback reinforces the system. Feedback compounds strength. That is the rule. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Combine resilience with prior chapters. Micro habits, silence, single tasking, systems, distraction defense, micro decisions, all feed into capacity for difficulty. Resilience amplifies effectiveness. The mind that embraces discomfort executes systems more consistently. The brain that endures pressure maintains clarity under stress. That is compounding mental strength. That is unavoidable. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Repeat it. End each day with deliberate reflection on discomfort. Identify successes. Identify resistance overcome. Re-anchor systems. Reinforce routines. Adjust micro-challenges. Strength compounds in cycles of deliberate exposure. This is your training. This is unavoidable. This is mastery. Strength is built in the uncomfortable, repeated every day. Next, you will learn to engineer your environment for sustained success. You will learn to automate focus, eliminate friction, and protect mental energy. You will integrate resilience with structural control to defend attention at all times. That is the next step. That is inevitable. That is mastery. Chapter 8. Automate your environment for success. You have a choice. You can leave your environment unstructured, or you can engineer it. That is the decision. Your surroundings dictate behavior more than willpower. Every cluttered desk, every open app, every visual or auditory distraction drains energy. Every poorly organized space demands decisions your brain does not need to make. That is the cost. Your space decides your focus before your mind even tries. Repeat it. Internalize it. Live it. That is the principle. Understand the power of environment. The brain conserves energy. It defaults to convenience. Without structure, convenience dominates. Tasks are delayed. Focus is scattered. Attention is stolen. That is why elite performers engineer every detail. They do not rely on willpower alone. They remove friction. They automate behavior through space. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Your space decides your focus before your mind even tries. Start by decluttering. Remove anything unnecessary from your workspace. Papers, gadgets, notes, reminders not directly related to the current task. Remove them. Visual clutter drains attention. Every object competes for mental energy. Minimalism creates clarity. It forces the mind to focus only on what matters. That is the first layer of environmental automation. Repeat it. Reinforce it. Live it. Your space decides your focus before your mind even tries. Design focus zones. Allocate distinct areas for specific tasks. One zone for deep work. One zone for reading. One zone for planning. Physical separation signals the brain. It creates association. Attention automatically shifts based on location. Distraction is reduced. Focus is reinforced. Mental effort is conserved. That is the system. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Your space decides your focus before your mind even tries. Repeat it. Time block your environment. Assign uninterrupted blocks to specific zones. Protect the time. Shield it from distraction. Treat it as non-negotiable. Deep work zone, 9 to 11 a.m. Reading zone, 11:30 to 12 o'clock. Planning zone, 4 to 4:30 p.m. The schedule enforces structure. The brain adapts to repetition. Tasks are executed efficiently. Willpower is not required to start. That is the principle. That is strategy. Your space decides your focus before your mind even tries. Automate tools and resources. Place only what is necessary for the task at hand. Arrange notebooks, devices, and software to minimize friction. Preload materials before starting work. Remove obstacles that create excuses. The fewer decisions required, the more energy reserved for high-value tasks. That is automation. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Your space decides your focus before your mind even tries. Repeat it. Use environmental cues deliberately. Light, sound, and placement signal attention. A bright desk signals alertness. Noise-canceling headphones signal isolation. A clean monitor signals priority. These cues enforce focus automatically. They reduce reliance on self-control. They condition the mind to respond to triggers. That is the system. That is leverage. That is strategy. Your space decides your focus before your mind even tries. Repeat it. Protect your environment. Do not allow interruptions. Inform colleagues or family of protected zones. Use do not disturb indicators. Schedule breaks intentionally. Each disruption reduces focus. Each defended environment reinforces discipline. You do not negotiate. You act. You enforce. You repeat. That is the rule. That is the principle. Your space decides your focus before your mind even tries. Repeat it. Combine with previous chapters. Micro habits execute in defined spaces. Silence is maintained in isolated zones. Single tasking occurs naturally when the environment signals priority. Systems execute efficiently when surroundings reinforce process. Distraction defense is amplified by environmental cues. Micro decisions are simplified because space dictates behavior. Challenges become manageable because the environment prepares the mind. That is compounding leverage. That is unavoidable. Your space decides your focus before your mind even tries. Implement digital environmental controls. Close unnecessary tabs. Silence notifications. Use applications that block distractions. Automate reminders. Schedule work sessions in distraction-free zones. Remove temptation. Reduce friction. Each layer strengthens systems. Each adjustment preserves mental energy. That is the method. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Your space decides your focus before your mind even tries. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Micro pauses reinforce environment. When entering a focus zone, pause. Observe surroundings. Adjust lighting. Adjust desk layout. Adjust tools. Affirm silently. My space enforces my focus. My mind obeys the system. These small rituals condition attention automatically. Over time, the brain associates the environment with discipline. That is the system. That is automation. That is mastery. Your space decides your focus before your mind even tries. Track environmental effectiveness. Daily review is non-negotiable. Are focus zones functional? Are distractions present? Are resources preloaded? Are tools optimized? Adjust layout. Reinforce rules. Eliminate friction. Each review strengthens mental performance. Each adjustment reinforces habit. Each repetition compounds discipline. That is unavoidable. Your space decides your focus before your mind even tries. Repeat it. Resist the urge to rely on willpower in unstructured spaces. Willpower alone is limited. Motivation alone is temporary. Environment automates execution. Space determines action. Attention is preserved. Energy is conserved. Clarity becomes automatic. That is leverage. That is mastery. That is unavoidable. Your space decides your focus before your mind even tries. Repeat it. In the day, deliberately. Leave focus zones prepared for the next session. Reset tools. Clear clutter. Arrange reminders. Signal the brain that structure continues tomorrow. This reduces morning friction. Reinforces discipline. Automates execution. That is preparation. That is leverage. That is the system. Your space decides your focus before your mind even tries. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Next, you will learn how to combine all systems, habits, silence, single tasking, decision control, challenges, and environment into an unbreakable framework for mental strength. You will create unstoppable momentum, capable of sustaining attention, focus, and resilience in any circumstance. That is the next step. That is inevitable. That is mastery. Chapter 9. The mental pause that changes everything. You have a choice. You can react immediately, or you can pause. That is the decision. Immediate reactions are weak. They are impulsive. They're driven by emotion, habit, or habitually scattered thought. Decisions made without reflection are flawed. Actions taken without pause are often regretful. That is reality. Every moment before action is an opportunity. Every second of stillness preserves energy. Every pause restores clarity. A pause is a weapon. Use it relentlessly. Repeat it. Internalize it. Live it. That is the principle. Understand the power. The human mind defaults to reaction. Impulses, emotions, and habitual responses dominate. Without intervention, you act unconsciously. Without intervention, focus is lost. Without intervention, mistakes occur. That is the cost of inaction. That is why elite performers implement deliberate pause. Athletes take a breath before a critical play. Executives take a moment before responding to a heated email. Soldiers pause before acting in high-stakes situations. The pause prevents error. The pause preserves clarity. The pause enforces discipline. That is the system. A pause is a weapon. Use it relentlessly. Start with a 60-second pause. Before responding, before deciding, before speaking, take 1 full minute. Count silently. Breathe deeply. Observe thoughts. Observe impulses. Do not act. Do not justify. Do not rationalize. Simply pause. 1 minute. That is the minimum. That is the system. That is unavoidable. A pause is a weapon. Use it relentlessly. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Anchor the pause in practice. Every minor decision is a training opportunity. Before choosing where to eat, before answering a message, before reacting to criticism, pause. Observe. Reflect. Decide consciously. Each small instance compounds. Each repetition strengthens the neurological circuits for control. Over time, the pause becomes automatic. Reflexive impulses weaken. Mental clarity grows. That is the principle. That is the method. A pause is a weapon. Use it relentlessly. Observe real-world applications. In sports, elite athletes pause briefly before a critical play. This split second prevents mistakes under pressure. It allows the mind to anticipate consequences. In business, executives pause before responding to negotiations or conflicts. They avoid impulsive concessions. They maintain strategy. Soldiers pause before decisive action. They assess risk. They act deliberately. The pause converts pressure into advantage. That is the principle. That is leverage. A pause is a weapon. Use it relentlessly. Integrate the pause into high-pressure moments. Identify triggers, stress, confrontation, surprise, frustration. Each is an opportunity to apply the pause. Take 1 minute. Observe breathing. Observe emotion. Observe impulses. Let clarity emerge naturally. Avoid immediate reaction. Immediate reaction is weak. The pause is strength. The pause is discipline. The pause is unavoidable. A pause is a weapon. Use it relentlessly. Repeat it. Combine with previous systems. Micro-habits reinforce the habit of pausing. Silence and meditation sharpen the mind to notice impulses. Single tasking trains attention to the present moment. Environmental engineering reduces distractions, making pauses easier. Systems, distraction defense, and micro-decisions support deliberate choice. Challenges and resilience training strengthen tolerance for delay. All layers converge. The pause becomes automatic. That is compounding mental strength. That is unavoidable. A pause is a weapon. Use it relentlessly. Micro-pauses throughout the day amplify effectiveness. Before starting a task, pause. Before making a decision, pause. Before responding to criticism or confrontation, pause. 1 minute. Observe. Reflect. Act deliberately. The pause preserves mental energy. The pause conserves attention. The pause strengthens decision-making. That is the system. That is leverage. That is discipline. A pause is a weapon. Use it relentlessly. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Resist the urge to act immediately. The mind will protest. The body will urge reaction. That is expected. That is normal. That is the signal of effective training. Persist. Apply the pause consistently. Correct the impulse immediately. Reinforce the habit. Over time, reactions become measured. Attention becomes controlled. Clarity becomes default. That is unavoidable. A pause is a weapon. Use it relentlessly. Track performance. Observe where pauses were effective. Reflect on instances where impulsive action caused error. Identify triggers. Refine practice. Adjust timing. Reinforce systems. Each review strengthens the neurological circuits of discipline. Each repetition compounds mental clarity. Each adjustment reinforces control. That is the system. That is method. That is unavoidable. A pause is a weapon. Use it relentlessly. Anchor the pause with ritual. Take a deep breath. Count silently to 60. Visualize desired outcome. Affirm internally, I act deliberately. I pause to preserve clarity. I control my mind. This conditions the brain. It reinforces automatic discipline. It prepares the mind to act decisively under pressure. That is the method. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. A pause is a weapon. Use it relentlessly. End the day with reflection on pauses. Review decisions. Identify reactions controlled. Identify reactions missed. Strengthen understanding. Adjust systems. Reinforce the habit. Every observation compounds clarity. Every repetition builds discipline. Every iteration strengthens resilience. That is the system. That is strategy. That is unavoidable. A pause is a weapon. Use it relentlessly. Next, you will integrate all systems into a cohesive, unbreakable mental framework. Habits, silence, single tasking, systems, distraction defense, micro-decisions, resilience, environment, and now the pause, combine to produce unstoppable focus, clarity, and mental strength. That is the next step. That is inevitable. That is mastery. Chapter 10. Consistency is the ultimate power. You have a choice. You can show up sporadically, or you can show up relentlessly. That is the decision. All mental strength, all focus, all clarity, all resilience comes down to one thing: consistency. One action repeated daily. One system executed without exception. One habit reinforced relentlessly. That is the principle. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Repeat it. Internalize it. Live it. That is the truth. Understand the compounding effect. A single action yields little. 10 actions may seem small, but repeated daily, week after week, month after month, the effect multiplies. Neural pathways strengthen. Attention improves. Discipline becomes automatic. Small daily wins accumulate into mastery. Results are inevitable. That is the system. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Start with your foundational habits. Micro habits from Chapter 1. Silence from Chapter 2. Single tasking from Chapter 3. Systems from Chapter 4. Distraction defense from Chapter 5. Micro decisions from Chapter 6. Daily challenges from Chapter 7. Environmental automation from Chapter 8. The mental pause from Chapter 9. Each is a pillar. Each requires daily reinforcement. Skipping one weakens the structure. Showing up strengthens it. That is the principle. That is the rule. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Track progress systematically. Use a journal, a checklist, or a habit tracker. Record each completed action. Review failures immediately. Adjust systems without breaking the chain. Momentum is built through repetition, not occasional bursts. Missing a day diminishes leverage. Maintaining the chain compounds strength. That is how mastery is built. That is how mental strength becomes unstoppable. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Anchor routines to cues. Time of day, environment, or sequence of actions triggers execution. Morning routines, focus zones, micro-pauses, and scheduled deep work are non-negotiable. Automation reduces reliance on willpower. Automation reduces friction. Automation guarantees execution. That is the system. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. Resist the temptation for shortcuts. Intensity without consistency is temporary. Motivation without habit is fleeting. Sporadic effort produces minimal results. Consistent action, even small, compounds. Each repetition strengthens neural circuits. Each completed task reinforces discipline. Each day compounds mental strength. That is the principle. That is unavoidable. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Use micro-reflection to reinforce adherence. At the end of each day, evaluate execution. Which habits were completed? Which systems were followed? Where did focus falter? Adjust without compromise. Reflection is not optional. Reflection compounds discipline. Reflection converts repetition into mastery. That is the system. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Combine systems strategically. Habits, silence, single tasking, systems, distraction, defense, micro decisions, daily challenges, environment, and mental pause, all executed daily. Create an unbreakable framework. Each supports the other. Each amplifies the effect of the next. Momentum compounds. Strength becomes automatic. Focus becomes default. Clarity becomes habitual. That is mastery. That is the outcome of consistency. That is unavoidable. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Anchor mental cues to daily repetition. Begin each session by affirming, I show up. I execute. I reinforce my systems. End each session with reflection. I preserve my attention. I reinforce discipline. I build mental strength. The brain links repetition with reward. Habits solidify. Focus becomes automatic. That is the system. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Track cumulative results. Over weeks, notice clarity improving. Over months, notice attention expanding. Over years, notice mental strength becoming unshakable. The compounding effect of small daily actions is relentless. There is no shortcut. There is no substitution. There is no debate. Show up every day. Execute every system. Reaffirm every habit. That is the principle. That is leverage. That is mastery. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Resist excuses. Do not wait for motivation. Do not wait for energy. Do not wait for perfect conditions. Conditions will never be perfect. Motivation will never be constant. Energy will fluctuate. You act regardless. You repeat regardless. You reinforce regardless. That is the rule. That is discipline. That is unavoidable. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Repeat it. Repeat it. Repeat it. End each week with a deliberate review. Consolidate successes. Identify weak points. Adjust routines. Reinforce environmental controls. Protect focus zones. Prepare for the next week. Every review compounds clarity. Every repetition strengthens mental toughness. Every adjustment reinforces invincibility. That is the system. That is leverage. That is unavoidable. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly repetition compounds. This is not theoretical. It is practical. It is structural. It is inevitable. Show up every day. Execute all systems. Reinforce habits. Protect attention. Conserve energy. Embrace challenge. Engineer your environment. Pause before action. Master micro-decisions. Automate behavior. Each repetition strengthens mental circuits. Each repetition builds invincibility. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Repeat it. Live it. Execute it. Finally, commit to the long game. Mental strength is not built overnight. It is built in the quiet, relentless repetition of daily systems. It is built in habits executed consistently, even when motivation fades. It is built in showing up when it is inconvenient, uncomfortable, or tedious. That is how you become unstoppable. That is how you build clarity, focus, and unbreakable discipline. That is the principle. That is mastery. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Before you go, take one deliberate moment. Commit to showing up tomorrow. Commit to executing your micro habits. Commit to protecting focus. Commit to resilience. Commit to discipline. This is your responsibility. This is your power. This is your system. Consistency beats intensity. Repetition builds invincibility. Remember it. Repeat it. Live it.